So round 4, I'm paired against National Master Vlad Shevkunov, who is I think around 16, 17 years old, so still like kind of up and coming player. And for this game I chose d4. Again, I had a little bit of time to prepare, and he ended up going d5 and going for the Slav. So I play knight f3, knight f6, and here I actually play the move knight c3 for the first time in many years in OTB chess. I've been usually playing e3 in this position, or starting with knight c3 and then playing e3, and essentially playing for some kind of e3 Slav for several years now. I did used to play this one back when I was around 2000, 2100 or so, but eventually I switched away because I felt like there was just way too much theory here that white needed to know, and black just has like a number of super solid options, including e6, a6, and of course the big one, d takes c4, where there's just tons and tons of theory here. Everything was equal everywhere, and so I figured, like, if I'm just going to get an equal position, I might as well play something a little bit more flexible, which I felt like strategically might be more challenging and white can get more of a game. But for this game, I came prepared actually with a very specific idea. My opponent does play d takes c4, and here I play e4. So this is known as the Geller Gambit, and back in my day, this one never had a super solid reputation because here black plays b5 and pretty much just holds on to the pawn. Like, this is a very pure pawn sacrifice. So of course a4 was always the main line, and then knight e5 or e3 and bishop takes c4. And white wins the pawn back, but black slowly equalizes and so on. But I was actually really excited to play this one. The coach I've recently been working with, he sent me a file with some notes, and he suggested that I play this because it's a pretty interesting and sharp try. And I have been missing playing these kinds of positions where white sacrifices the pawn and just plays for this kind of long-term initiative using these like positional pluses of controlling the center and having a better structure and so on. And so here the point after b5 is, instead of advancing directly with e5, which is like the main way that people used to play it, and immediately giving up the d5 square, the kind of new modern way of playing these positions is to just focus on development with bishop e2 and castling, and then quickly playing b3 just to open up the position, not trying to win back the pawn, just looking for compensation that way. So e6, castles, bishop b7. Of course, black has lots of moves, and I don't want to get into my prep too much, mainly because I don't even remember it at this point. But here I play this move rook to b1. This was an idea I believe first played in high-level chess by Dubov, and the idea itself is very cool. The problem for white is that if we play b3, that black can go b4 here, and then fix the pawn with c3. And these positions can be very double-edged. Sometimes they're absolutely fine for white, sometimes they're absolutely fine for black, because black gets this like protected pass pawn on c3, but on the other hand, the white just gets to kind of fully dominate the center and slowly prepare like pawn breaks like a3 and stuff like that. And so white just gets very nice long-term compensation here. But that said, these positions I would say are super unclear. So the idea behind rook b1 is to play b3, and number one, in case of c takes b3, to actually take back with the rook, where the rook is going to be active. But number two, let's say black makes some random move like bishop e7, white goes b3. Now black doesn't have b4 here because white has b takes c4, and the bishop on b7 is hanging. So this is kind of the tactical point, that when white gets this one, this position is not very fun for black. Like, they can take on e4, but this bishop on b7 is a very important piece. Now white's light square bishop is going to be really strong. The rook on b7 is good. The c3 pawn will eventually be lost. And white just has more than enough play here. So I think already here my opponent was spending some time, so he was kind of unfamiliar with the line, which I definitely felt like was a good sign. But he ends up playing one of the most solid ways. He goes knight d7 here, b3, and now bishop to b4. And taking advantage of the fact that the knight is hanging, so I have to go queen to c2. Fortunately, this was one of the lines that I was like checking very carefully before the game, because to me it looked very natural, and so I thought we might get here. And here white is actually willing to give up another pawn after bishop takes and knight takes e4. Otherwise, white's playing e5 already and bc, and so black, yeah, just doesn't have enough time to just complete their development comfortably, so they have to do something. So takes, knight takes e4, queen e3, and now if the knight just moves back, then white will have b takes c4, and we're still down one pawn here, but the b5 pawn is under attack. We have ideas of bishop a3, and now the dark square bishop is an unopposed piece and very, very strong. So white just has more than enough compensation here, just a nice initiative. So around here, he was already starting to spend a lot of time, and yeah, I started to feel very optimistic. The main move, which you can figure out if you just run your engine for a little bit, is to play c5, where black gives back some material but stabilizes the knight on e4. And then there was a game here between a couple of Chinese grandmasters after bc, b4, d5, and this was basically as far as I remembered, that white is just going d5 in this position, bishop b2, rook fd1, and yeah, engine says equal, but obviously it's like a very playable position, and yeah, I was feeling pretty optimistic about this one. Even if the opponent does find all these moves and get this far, of course he's going to have to like burn a ton of time to figure all this out, and then the position is still like very fun and very playable. In the game, black ends up going knight df6, which I knew, okay, was a mistake, because I knew that c5 here was pretty much the only move. Yeah, it didn't take me too long to play b takes c4 here. It's just kind of the obvious move that white should be playing, opening up the rook, setting up bishop a3, and so on. I did think about bishop a3 in this position, but to me I wasn't too impressed. Like black can go like a5 and b4, for example. Black can also think about lodging the pawn on c3. So I thought I have to take. Black castles, bishop a3, rook to e8, and yeah, now this one definitely felt like a critical moment. And so the main two moves I considered here were bishop d3 and rook fd1. I mean, basically white's still a pawn down, but I figured that white should have very nice compensation. At least I knew that the computer eval is supposed to be something like 0.7, 0.8 for white, maybe +1. So quite a bit of play, given that we are down a pawn. And yeah, I wasn't exactly sure what to do. I really liked, actually I was thinking about rook fc1 as well. One of these rook moves just to kind of build up the position felt very natural. But concretely, I started looking at bishop d3, and I just couldn't find what's wrong with this. So I ended up playing this move because I really felt like it was the most direct. So okay, of course we're attacking the knight. The knight has to drop back to d6, and now queen f4, hitting this knight again. And here, if black doesn't want to go knight f5, which he ends up playing in the game, he has to go knight c8, which of course is very passive. And then I figured, okay, at this point, then I'll play like rook fd1 or something, and yeah, has to be great for white to like kick this knight from e4 all the way to c8. But of course, my opponent plays knight f5, and from afar, my idea here was to go g4, because I felt like if I can get g4 in, and the knight goes back to somewhere like knight e7, for example, then my next move is knight e5, and I'm threatening g5, and queen takes f7, and this looked very, very scary for black. Like, I thought maybe he has to go rook f8 here, and here I thought I would have options, like I can either go g5 right away, and then like queen h4, and trying to force black to play g6 or create some weakness, or I can make, again, building up moves like rook fd1 or rook b3. I thought was quite interesting. A very thematic idea for this position, just getting ready to lift the rook along the third rank at some point, and yeah, like bishop b1, for example, and I think white just gets a really, really strong attack. Yeah, so after spending, I think, a little bit more time here just double checking, I ended up going g4. At this point, my opponent was burning lots and lots of time. I had already been spending time too, because I've been out of book for a couple moves. But I had like huge time advantage, like 30-40 minutes here, and ended up playing g4, and he runs his clock down quite a bit. In fact, I'm having a hard time remembering, but I think at this point he was getting pretty low, like maybe even down to like 10 minutes. And this is move 17, you know, we have to make it to move 40 to get extra time. So like really dangerously low in terms of like getting into time pressure with so many moves to make. But he ends up spending a lot of time and finding a very strong move e5, which I like totally missed. Like I didn't even see it. I saw it, I think, while he was thinking on this position, because I was kind of thinking like, you know, 97 is kind of his only move. And then, you know, white's playing 95 and so on, because 96 there's g5, 96, and so on. I actually, sorry, I remember now. I thought he was also considering this one, which looks like a tactic at first, because if knight d4 there's e5, and if queen takes d4 then black trades queens and skewers the minor pieces, and so on bishop b2 or bishop c5 there's e5, and white's losing back the piece. But here my plan was to go rook fd1, and the point is that if black takes the knight on d4, then we have bishop takes h7 check in the end, so white ends up winning the exchange. And I thought black might have some compensation here, but because black still has a pawn, and I did play g4, so my pawns are kind of weak. There's like e5, for example, but yeah, the more I looked at it, the more I thought this position should be good for white, like rook d6 takes, rook d7. And yeah, it seems like white's rooks are active and black's pieces are not. So I thought maybe he's like thinking about this, because from afar I could see why, you know, you might think you have this tactic as black. But no, then he goes e5, and just, yeah, super strong move. I realized maybe like 2 minutes before he played it that this is another option that's not so obvious for white. And yeah, the point is, of course, hitting the queen, trying to play e4 as well. If knight takes e5, then the d4 pawn hangs, and white's position loses, you know, all of its stability. Black can play like c5 somewhere, and the bishop opens up on the diagonal, and then g4 is just this horrible weakness. I think queen takes d4 might also be possible in this position, since the knight on e5 is hanging here too. And so if I go d takes e5, then there's queen takes d3, and black picks up one piece and hits the bishop on a3, so this didn't look clear at first glance at all. And lastly, you know, the move that I was hoping to play, queen takes f5, at first I thought, wait, maybe this is good, because on e4, okay, if black wins back their piece, then white's position is kind of busted, because I'm still just down material and, again, open light squares. But I have g5 here, and I realize actually white should be doing quite okay, because counterattacking the knight, if bishop c8 there's queen f4, and otherwise if the knight moves away then this pawn is just gone, so I'm keeping my extra piece is what I thought here. But then I realized on queen takes f5 black is going to go either g6 or bishop c8, just hitting the queen first, and I don't have a lot of squares. I got to go queen g5 and now e4, and I don't have a good move here. Black is winning their piece back, and then my king side is weak, and yeah, basically white is just much worse already. So yeah, I end up going into the tank here because I realized like, oh man, I kind of blew it. And indeed, this was the only move for black that gives them, you know, the decent position. Not even just like holdable, but like quite decent. So yeah, otherwise white would be winning. So going back to this moment, bishop d3 turns out was not the right move. The engine suggests knight e5 here, and okay, this move is also logical, just like activating the knight. The bishop can also go to f3, where it's quite strong on the diagonal, and then eventually just building up with the rook on d1. So basically, you know, I kind of rushed things, because okay, this g4 just wasn't working, and now yeah, black is getting some real counterplay. So I end up figuring out that, and I think d5 just seems like my best chance. Queen takes d3. I take on f5 here with the pawn. I was thinking about queen takes f5 as well, but yeah, I didn't really love the looks of this endgame after takes, and either something like knight h5 here, or knight e4, or even c5 somewhere just to hit the knight. It just looked like black is going to open up and should be totally fine. So I go g takes f5, keeping the queens on the board, My idea was if queen takes a3, of course I'm taking on f6, and, just trying to play for some kind of checkmate on the g file. Maybe I can go c5 and like king h1 and rook g1, and I really had no idea what the evaluation is. I thought it's still very, very risky for black. For example, because if black plays c5, then they're cutting off their queen, and I just immediately get like queen g5 and queen h6. And if black plays like queen f8 or something, then I don't remember exactly what I was thinking, but maybe rook b3 here, or maybe c5 just to keep the bishop closed. And yeah, I thought white has some attacking chances. Instead, in this position, my opponent goes knight h5, which I felt like is probably objectively a better move, just hitting the queen. Now queen g4. And here I was really expecting c5, which looks very, very natural, just hitting the knight on f3 and just opening up the bishop. And I think I have to play knight to g5 here. And yeah, I had no idea what's going on. Engine says h6 here is now the only move for black, and then white plays knight takes f7, bishop f3, and we could actually get a draw by perpetual here with knight h6, knight f7. These lines were really, really crazy in the game, like on knight g5. I just thought I'm okay here, like I didn't see exactly how I'm losing. I'm threatening the knight on h5. I thought maybe g6, and the game remains very complicated. I think the engine gives rook takes b5, but during the game I just really wasn't thinking this far. I just figured, okay, once we get here, I'll try to figure it out, because really it felt like de5, what I did, were just kind of the only moves that white had in the position. So black ends up going g6, which I thought was also possible, okay, just immediately defending the knight. But I was happy to see this one, because this one allows me to play rook to b3, hitting the queen, and essentially forcing queen takes f5, because otherwise I think black is just losing, yeah, way too much time if they play queen d7, like not taking the pawn, and then black's king might be in some danger. So queen f5, and then we get this endgame where white is still a pawn down, but I was actually really happy to escape into this one, realizing that I like completely messed up the position and was in danger of being seriously worse. And then when we got here, I started evaluating things, and I actually felt like it's really not that bad for white. And I got pretty optimistic. And I ended up playing this move, king h1, just trying to get my rook to the g file as quickly as possible. Of course, I didn't make this move easily. I realized, after c5, this could be super, super dangerous. But I thought I'm going rook g1 check, and then either king h8 or knight g7 or something. Let's say rook g5, knight g7. And then I thought in this position, I'll figure something out. I'll go king to g1. I can maybe, I can't take on b5 with the rook, maybe with the pawn. I can take on c5 somewhere. I really didn't think this position was that bad for white. After the game, of course, I checked with the engine, and Stockish hates this position. It says white is like completely lost because like the rooks are just coming in so quickly. Like rook d8, there's rook takes e5 possibly. Although, okay, opening the diagonal might not be in black's best interest, but like rook d8, rook d1 check, or taking on c4, and then going like rook d3 at some point. And yeah, it's like actually very, very bad for white, this position. So I completely misevaluated it. Thankfully for me, my opponent was in heavy time trouble. I think he's down to like under 5 minutes at this point, move 23. So he really doesn't have a lot of time to figure it out. He just goes h6, which I think is, okay, very human decision as well, just getting the king off of the dark squares. So I go bishop d6 here. I could have also started with rook g1 check, but I didn't think it was needed. King h7 and c5. And I was very happy to block the bishop on b7. And I was really thinking I'm getting something here, like knight d4, bishop, or rook g8. If takes, then bishop b7 here, but rook f3, bishop d7, and I take on f5. And yeah, I really thought like my position here is quite good. If black takes on f5, rook takes f5, I thought, okay, this is an endgame I'm more than happy to play with this bishop against the knight. As it turns out, I was just, again, way too optimistic in this position. Like, the engine thinks black is winning here, essentially. And could have played like either rook g5 or f4, could have just been way more materialistic, not even allowing me to take this one. And I guess the point here is that in the long run, white is still like seriously weak on the light squares. And that's what black starts playing for. So he goes bishop e6, knight e7, and kind of only move here to stop bishop to d5. And again, Engine says one thing during the game. I'll tell you guys, I really felt like I'm winning the position, or at least I'm the one putting pressure. He's like just trying to survive. I realize, of course, there's danger for white in this position as well with this bishop d5 looming. But objectively, I felt like the evaluation should be in my favor. And of course, I also have this massive time advantage. So black doesn't even have time to think about whether he's better or how to convert. He has like a minute or 2 minutes here, 30-second increment, but he basically has to make a move every 30 seconds, which is not easy. So he goes rook e8. Interesting move, right? Offering the exchange that he can get bishop d5, which of course would be very strong for black. And here I'm just playing, practically. So rook a3. Now if black takes on e7 and gives bishop d5, I have f3. And okay, it's ugly, but white is not getting mated, and I do have the extra exchange here, so I figured this is good. Rook a3, rook g7 is played. Now I could take on a7 here, or go f3. I decided to go rook g1. I thought this was kind of the most practical, just training off one pair of rooks so that my king can finally escape the corner and not be in this like constant mating net, which I think was a good practical decision. Black ends up taking, king takes, knight f4. And yeah, here again, I could take on a7. I'm also not having tons of time at this point because I started burning lots of time, figuring out what to do. So I have to kind of speed it up a little bit here. I end up playing f3. Basically, I just felt like this was safe, and I thought, okay, I just want to create some squares for my king. This c6 pawn, this a7 pawn, they're not really going anywhere. As it turns out, the engine points out rook a8 and says, like, black is equal, but okay, this is just engine nonsense. Knight d5 is played. Now I take on c6, rook g8 check, king f2, and bishop h3. And I was kind of expecting this, like black needs to play for some kind of activity here. And it's really not so simple for white. Like I can take on a7, but then the rook comes into g2, and there's stuff like, for example, king e1, knight c3 looked very scary, threatening rook e2 mate. I think I have knight d4 here, so I'm not like not losing, but yeah, this was definitely very hard to figure out, and it felt like black is getting lots and lots of play everywhere. So I end up finding this move f4, which I thought was a good practical try. And my idea here is that, okay, I'm creating another square for the king, so for rook g2 check, I wanted to play king f3 here. And to me, it looked like black doesn't really have the coordination, right, needed to create counterplay. And yeah, as soon as white is able to start making moves like knight d4, c6, the endgame just wins itself. The c-pawn is too strong. And the idea, of course, if knight takes f4 was to play rook to g3, where I'm wanting to trade rooks, because again, I believe in the power of the c-pawn. And if rook takes g3, king takes g3, of course, black has two pieces under attack, so this is very difficult to deal with. There's bishop g2 hitting the knight, but then the knight just moves, and yeah, the pieces are still under attack. And if black doesn't trade and goes something like rook c8, for example, then I believe knight e7 I could start with. There might be other moves as well, but the idea was to go e6. And yeah, as soon as the rook moves, white plays e6, knight on f4 is hanging, bishop on h3 is hanging, and yeah, essentially it felt like black is losing material. There are other moves as well, like king f3. Basically, the knight and bishop are rook f3, just, yeah, big trouble here. So that was my idea, and my opponent actually ends up just flagging on this move, and it was game over. I think he was down to 30 seconds here, and he was looking for a move. He realized, I think, knight takes f4. I think he was more worried about just like e6 right away, and he thought he's losing a piece, which is very understandable. E6 might be strong, but okay, my idea was to go rook g3, which I thought was pretty good as well. And yeah, I think he, like, I don't know, was trying to make some move like bishop d7, but just made it like 1 second too late. Essentially, the game, I think, is definitely not over, but white is doing extremely well here. I can go knight d4, for example, and then rook takes a7 or c6, and yeah, I think it's just really, really hard for black to defend. As it turns out, the only defense he did have was rook g2 check, which ends up being not that bad, but on king f3, black has to find this move rook d2, which is definitely not obvious at first glance, but the point is black defends the rook, sets up bishop g2 check. The rook is kind of untouchable because the king can't go to e3, and so this bishop g2 is actually kind of annoying. Like, white's king is going to have to start moving up the king side, but there's not a ton of squares there, and black can play like bishop e4 and then try to set up more annoying counterplay. So according to the engine, this was still quite complicated and would have been, you know, a very fighting game, but okay, understandably kind of hard for black to see this, especially this rook d2 move. Definitely not obvious at first glance. So yeah, f4 ends up running out of time. I honestly, like, it's kind of funny. You know, after the game, I felt like, okay, probably wasn't a perfect game. I realized, you know, I messed up with this e5, but then I thought I like got back under control. I like played a nice end game, and I was kind of happy with the win. I also felt like, you know, I put pressure from the opening, and that's why we had like a big time advantage, and so of course eventually that played a big role as well. But then checking the game with the engine thinks I'm like pretty much worse or lost throughout, you know, once e5 happened. And yeah, it was a big shock. It's like just a completely different story than what I was thinking during the game, which, okay, it was kind of interesting. So yeah, after this one, I end up on 3.5 out of 4. So definitely doing really well in the tournament. And then there would just be one last round to go.